Hi everyone, my name is Sam. I'm a certified personal trainer at Red Rocks Community College Student Recreation Center. And today we're going to be talking about hip mobility fundamentals. And when it comes to improving motion at the hip joint, we need to ask ourselves the question, what motion of the hip are we trying to improve? This question is important because it helps guide us in terms of where we should focus our efforts. Everybody's hips are going to be a little bit different, everybody's limitations are going to be a little bit different, and therefore the motions that people are going to need to focus on are going to be a little bit different. Alright guys, so the first motion we're going to be focusing on is hip flexion. To improve hip flexion, we're going to be performing a unilateral straight leg raise, isometrically contracting our hip flexors in their end range position. So here's how it's going to look. I'm going to be on my back. And the first thing I want to think about is smashing my low back against the ground. From here, I'm going to keep one knee straight and lift my leg as high as I can. I'm going to hold for about 5 to 20 seconds in my end range available position. After that, I'm going to relax and try it again, this time seeing if I can gain a little bit more range of motion. After each attempt, you want to try and see if your range of motion has improved. What you'll find is, with this exercise, there would be less tension in your hamstrings after each subsequent set. So we have to ask ourselves, with hip flexion, why would someone be doing this exercise? Why would someone want to be trying to improve hip flexion? Well, we know hip flexion is important for activities like walking and running as we go through swing phase. But hip flexion is also important because this joint motion is what gives us competency in our ability to hinge at our hips. So here's what I mean. If you can't hinge your hips by moving femur on a fixed trunk in the case of a straight leg raise, what do you think is going to happen when you try and hinge your hips by moving trunk on a fixed femur in the case of picking something off the ground? If this joint position isn't available, what's going to happen is you're going to have to move at joints above the hip in the case of the spine. So you're going to have to round at your spine, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just not as of a strong or stable position, especially if you're trying to move an appreciable amount of load, whether that be deadlifting or moving a heavy box. The second motion we're going to be working on is hip extension. To do this, we're going to be focusing on our glute max and its ability to contract. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be lying on our stomach with one knee bent. With the knee that's bent, we're going to lift that leg up in the air. So here's how it's going to look. I'm going to hold for about 5 to 20 seconds, repeating about 1 to 4 times. Now there are a couple considerations with this exercise. First, don't expect a whole lot of motion. Your leg isn't going to go swinging straight up in the air like it did with the straight leg raise, and that's okay. The second thing I want you to consider is a reverse action cue. So if you can visualize this, this is the socket of my hip, this is the ball of my hip, and my elbow represents my knee. So instead of thinking about bringing your knee up, I want you to think about bringing the ball of your hip and jamming it into the ground to create the movement. What I find is that this creates a better muscular sensation in the glute max and tends to reduce compensatory movement within the low back. So with that said, why would we want to improve hip extension? Why would we be doing this exercise? Well, hip extension is important because this joint motion is what propels us forward in activities like walking and running. Hip extension is also important because if we don't have the ability to extend our hips, we're going to have to compensate through extending through our back which can be problematic for most people. So the third motion of the hip we are going to focus on is hip internal rotation. To do this, you're going to be lying on your side and you're going to swing one leg up towards your chest. If you're lying on your right side, you're going to want to swing your left leg up to your chest. So it's going to be a little easier if you have something like a foam roller, or you can use a stack of books or a pillow, something that you can just prop your leg up. So on my right side, I'm going to swing my left knee up to about 90 degrees. And then from here, I'm going to lift my left foot up to whatever end range position I have available and is comfortable. I'm going to hold for about 5 to 20 seconds before relaxing and attempting a second time. On the second attempt, I'm going to see if I can gain a little bit more motion before relaxing. Now when it comes to training rotation of the hip, we need to consider training it in various positions of flexion. Okay, so here's what I mean. Instead of just training rotation of the hip at 90 degrees, we should also consider training it at 60 degrees of flexion and also 30 degrees of flexion. This is important because training it in various positions of flexion is going to change the contact surfaces between the ball and the socket joint. Training it in various positions of flexion is also important because this changes what muscles are able to contribute to the movement. For example, the piriformis is an internal rotator when the hip is flexed at 90 degrees. When the hip is flexed at 0 degrees, it now functions as an external rotator. So there's an internal rotation. We have to ask ourselves, well, why would we want to focus on internal rotation? Why would someone want to be doing this exercise? Well, first of all, rotation in general is a vital function of a ball and socket joint. And secondly, if we don't have internal rotation of the hip, we're going to have to compensate by trying to gain rotation somewhere else. Typically, this is through the trunk. And what's interesting is if someone doesn't have internal rotation, let's say on their right hip, they're also going to have a hard time rotating their trunk to the same side. If we don't have internal rotation at the hip, this is also going to influence how motions at the foot and ankle happen. Okay, internal rotation of the hip also corresponds with what we call pronation at the ankle. And so if you're missing this joint position, it's going to influence stuff at the trunk and potentially stuff at the foot and ankle, which is why we need it. The final motion that we're going to be focusing on is hip external rotation. Now the setup is going to be pretty similar to that of which we were training internal rotation. The only difference is I'm going to swing my opposite leg up. So if I'm lying on my right side, instead of swinging my left leg up to my chest, I'm going to swing my right leg up to my chest. Now I find it to be a little bit more comfortable if you place something underneath the leg of the non-working leg. So swing my right leg up to about 90 degrees. And I'm going to lift my right leg up, holding 5 to 20 seconds before relaxing and attempting a second time. Just like with internal rotation, we need to consider training external rotation in various positions of flexion. Like we've previously discussed, this changes contact surfaces between the ball and socket joint. It also changes which muscles are able to contribute to the movement. So instead of just training external rotation at 90 degrees, also consider training it in 60 degrees of flexion and also 30 degrees of flexion. So there we have external rotation, and we need to ask ourselves, why would someone want to be doing external rotation exercises? Well, like we've already said, rotation in general is critical to the function of a ball and socket joint. but we need external rotation just as much as we need internal rotation. Okay, they're opposing movements and we need both for our hip joint to function properly and for it to be the best hip joint it can be. Alright guys, these are the fundamental 4 exercises you should be focusing on if you want good hip mobility. Now when it comes to sets and reps, I like to suggest performing 1 to 4 sets per side, contracting these muscles about 5 to 20 seconds. Now I like to suggest a more active approach in contracting these muscles as opposed to just passively stretching, because I find we can get a better response out of the nervous system in A, creating more lasting change, and B, creating more mobility without jeopardizing joint stability. And you certainly don't have to focus on all 4 of these exercises. Like I said in the introduction, everybody's hips are going to be a little bit different, everybody's limitations are going to be a little bit different, and therefore the exercises that you should focus on should be relative to you. I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to me speak, and we'll see you guys next time.